She describes him as a wicked man who would steal the eyes of naughty children, tearing them out and feeding them to his own grotesque bird-like children who live in the moon. Creative, but terrifying for the boy, obviously. Better than food, man. Bum 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 bum. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. I'm your host, Clifford Lee Sargent. Great to see you as always. Hope you're doing well. Get that coffee. Delicious. Peruvian today. Links for the mugs in the bio if you want to support the show. Thanks a bunch. Today is E.T.A. Hoffmann's The Sandman. The Sandman is a famous 19th century short Gothic horror story by the German Romantic author E.T.A. Hoffmann, published in 1816. It's contained in this collection, The Tales of Hoffman. The Sandman, which you can read in an afternoon, it's very short, is a dark, strange tale of folkloric horror and black magic. It's also an early example of a story containing a theme that is haunting all of us in real life today. AI, artificial intelligence. The simulation of the human and what happens when the machine begins to resemble the flesh so much that it's uncanny. A word often tossed into the book. Sigmund Freud actually wrote about the Sandman in his book, The Uncanny, which I'll be reviewing soon. My first Freud. Tough to say, first Freud. It is my first Freud, Gertrude. So I'm looking forward to that. The Sandman is a work of German Romanticism, and so I imagine it was possibly inspired by Goethe's Faust, or The Sorrows of Young Werther, or Werther in English, and or the actual real life of the German Romantic poet Heinrich von Kleist, who is a contemporary of Hoffmann's. As I say far too often, I'm reading Camille Paglia's Sexual Personae right now, and the chapter I'm currently on, she's discussing the Romantics in Goethe and Kleist. And so I thought, oh yeah, maybe Hoffmann was inspired by them. The Sandman shares a similar theme with both Goethe's Werther and Kleist's actual life. Can't say for sure if Hoffmann was inspired by them, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. I've reviewed both Goethe's Faust and Kleist's Michael Kohlhaas. Faust is, it's Faust, you can't go wrong, and Michael Kohlhaas is this amazing tale of revenge. It's terrific. Kafka loved it. I highly recommend both if you haven't had the chance. But anyways, back to The Sandman. So not only is The Sandman a romantic Gothic horror story, and an early Gothic horror story, not the first, but early, it's also an early forerunner of science fiction. It went on to influence German Expressionism in film, and Fritz Lang's Metropolis, for example, which you can totally see after reading the book, if you'll remember the android from the film. It's been years since I've seen that. That's such a great film. Fritz Lang is such a badass, man. I can't remember who did The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, but I would not be surprised if they were also a big reader of Hoffman. I think I first heard about Der Sandman from my German friend and patron Eric, same fellow who recommended The Cormorant by Stephen Gregory. Thanks a bunch, man. The Sandman is about many things, but overall the theme is about the journey into severe psychic distress, which in this story is extreme, and you are likely not going through anything close. However, plenty of people out there are experiencing challenges with mental health. And I'm sorry to say that if you are too, you're certainly not alone. It's obviously a god-awful time for mental health in the world these days. The statistics are grim, at best. I've spoken about it before. You know, we all know, right? So I'm an enthusiast of anything that can potentially help. Some of the tools I prefer would be eating properly, exercising, whether it's strength training or incline walking or swimming or volleyball, sports, getting proper sleep and enough of it. And another tool is therapy, which is why I'd like to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make finding therapy more affordable and accessible, which is helpful because finding a therapist could be potentially difficult given the slim options in your area, especially if you live somewhere rural, which does sound very nice these days, but yeah, it could be a challenge to find the right therapist that's a good fit in person. And unlike many things these days, they make finding a therapist easy because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions online, BetterHelp can match you with a therapist in as little as just a few days. And they make it easy to get matched with a therapist. There's a link below in the description. It's betterhelp.com/BTF. Clicking on that link helps support the show, but it also gets you 10% off your first month with BetterHelp, so you can try them out and see if it works for you. And I sincerely hope it does. And because finding the right therapist is a little bit like dating, as if you needed more challenges in your life of that nature, I know, I get it. If you don't initially fit with your therapist, which is a common thing in therapy, you can switch to a new therapist at any time at no additional cost, without having to worry about health insurance or who's in your network or anything like that. No worries. So if you're struggling right now, and let's be honest, who isn't? Please consider online therapy with BetterHelp. And thanks again to BetterHelp for supporting the show. E.T.A. Hoffmann was a famous German romantic author writing in the 19th century. He was a lawyer by day and a writer of strange tales by night, as well as many other things. He was a music critic and a talented illustrator and wore a lot of hats in his life. In his younger days, Hoffmann had aspired to become a musician. The A in his name was actually a chosen homage to Amadeus Mozart. He was also a big fan of Beethoven. I love Beethoven, much more than Mozart. Whoa! Right. Tchaikovsky's famous ballet, The Nutcracker, was actually based on Hoffman's story, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. I saw the one from the 70s with Mikhail Baryshnikov on TV when I was like 4 years old. That made an impact. I love the scene with the genie. One Halloween, my mom even dressed me up in that costume. I also played the Rat King in a school production once. That was memorable. I remember I had a big sword. I really like that sword. Anyways, it's just interesting how you grow up and things shape you and you don't realize their origins until later in life, you know? I knew of Hoffman. I grew up with Hoffman before I knew Hoffman, right? In a way. Hoffman had a tumultuous life, due in part to the chaos produced by the Napoleonic Wars, and sadly died of syphilis at only 46, back in Berlin. It's a bit ironic when you think about it in English. You know, a writer of German horror, himself killed by a German horror. No offense to sex workers. Sincerely, rest in peace. So, The Sandman. In the beginning, the book is partially told through a series of letters, the first one sent by a young man named Nathaniel, confessing the psychic turmoil he's been in due to, he believes, running into a sinister character from his past. Nathaniel, when he was younger, was terrified by a family visitor that would come to the house every night at 9 p.m. His mother would put him and his siblings to bed at that time, but he'd always hear the man's heavy footsteps on the staircase. Every night. His mother joked that it was the Sandman, and when Nathaniel asks an old woman, this nanny character, who the Sandman is, she describes him as a wicked man who would steal the eyes of naughty children, tearing them out and feeding them to his own grotesque bird-like children who live in the moon. Creative, but terrifying for the boy, obviously. And there's a stop-motion animation film that I've linked below from the early 90s from a fellow who worked on The Nightmare Before Christmas that illustrates this portion of the story in a disturbing fashion. Yeah, I'd preview that one before showing to your kids though. It's actually kind of fucked up. It's spooky. Unless you just want to scare the shit out of them into going to bed, then, you know, voila, you're welcome. And this is why I am not a parent. So, Nathaniel is dying to figure out who the Sandman really is. And so one night, he sneaks into his father's office, where he's able to witness this nocturnal guest of his dad's. And it appears like they're doing something around a hearth related to black magic or the occult. It turns out that the Sandman is this ogreish occasional guest of the house, Coppelius, an eccentric and slovenly lawyer, who is mean to the children and generally hated by the family, save for the father, who has some sort of work relationship with him, some sort of duty, wherein they partake in occult alchemical activities. It's like his weird, dark, oafish science partner. This takes a very dark, traumatic turn, and after some events unfold that end in the death of his father, Nathaniel is forever haunted thereafter by the monstrous image of Coppelius, the Sandman. We're not sure if this event was real or only partially real, or if there was like some sort of exaggeration in his memory, as the protagonist is unreliable and clearly mentally unsound. Not entirely though, so it's hard to parse it out, right? That's kind of the fun of the story. So he grows up into this neurotic young man with a fiancée named Clara, who he's in love with. But one day, after thinking to his horror that he's once again met Coppelius in the form of this traveling merchant who's trying to sell him a barometer, he begins to unravel. And this event, this meeting, is the catalyst for his descent into madness. And he begins boring Clara with readings from his occult books, which he's accumulated as he desperately tries to figure this thing out. That part's kind of funny. Feverish with this obsession over the Sandman, he has almost kind of Blakean vision, like William Blake, and frenetically composes this poem involving he and Clara in this surreal doomed episode. After he completes it, when she listens to it, and after he's done reading dismisses any concerns he might have, in spite of her unusually engaged demeanor, while listening to his horrific but well-constructed poem, in reply to her, he spits out one of the greatest insults in literature. I actually laughed out loud. It's perfect. After he's clearly prophesied a deeply foreboding outline of events to come, by relating his poem to his fiancée Clara, this occurs. Clara pressed him gently to her bosom and said softly, but very slowly and earnestly, "Nathaniel, my dear, dear Nathaniel, throw the mad, senseless, insane story into the fire." Nathaniel sprang up indignantly and, thrusting Clara away from him, cried, "Oh, you lifeless, accursed automaton!" Amazing. It's like something straight out of Withnall and I, the greatest comedy ever made. I could totally see Uncle Monty delivering that when he's raging at the cat, right? "Oh, you lifeless, accursed automaton!" Little did I know this was, in fact, yet a hint at things to come in the story, right? As it's so absurd, it's hysterical. I just thought it was like an amazingly clever line, but no, it's actually it's a hint at what's to come. I see the sun is burning me up over here, but you know, do what I can. The Sandman is a disordered amalgam of two weird tales combined into one hallucinatory horror story, overflowing with occult and psychoanalytical symbolism, not unlike the work of Franz Kafka, whom he influenced. In reading this part, you can immediately see why Freud was intrigued. Perhaps there does exist a dark power which fastens onto us and leads us off along a dangerous and ruinous path which we would otherwise not have trodden. But if so, this power must have assumed within us the form of ourself, indeed have become ourself, for otherwise we would not listen to it, otherwise there would be no space within us in which it could perform its secret work. But if we possess a firm mind, a mind strengthened through living cheerfully, we shall always be able to recognize an inimical influence for what it is, and then that uncanny power must surely go under, and the struggle we must suppose takes place before it can achieve that form which is, as I have said, a mere image of ourself. What is also certain, Lothario put in, is that this dark psychic power, once we have surrendered to it, often assumes other forms which the outer world throws across our path and draws them into us, so that the spirit which seems to animate those forms has in fact been enkindled by us ourselves. Through their affinity with us and their influence over our heart, they have the power to cast us into hell or transport us to heaven, but that is because they are phantoms of our own ego. So it's very psychological, psychoanalytical, the whole story. So buying a spyglass from the merchant Coppelius, who now, in this town where Nathaniel's living, goes by the name of Coppola, and I can't help but picture Francis as a strange, hulking, aggressive man peddling his wares, Nathaniel spies on the daughter of his neighbor, a physics professor named Spallanzani. So he gets over the idea that he's once again seen Coppelius, because this guy that he just met is Italian, and Coppelius, the one who frightened him when he was younger, was German. Olympia, the daughter, is beautiful, but all day long, he can see as he's spying on her through his window, she just sits at this table near the window and stares, in a catatonic trance, just sitting there. A ball is thrown at the local university and Nathaniel is invited. And there, Spallanzani shows off his daughter, who he's been sequestering for some reason. And she greets people and plays the piano, and people are kind of creeped out by her. She's polite, but there's something bizarre and stilted about her movements. Nathaniel dances with her and talks with her, and he's enraptured, right? She says very little, but unlike Clara, she pays attention to everything he's saying with unfaltering attention. What he discovers is yet another disturbing truth that weighs heavily on his already exacerbated psyche, and brings the origins of his madness, triggered by Coppelius, to their nightmarish conclusion. It's not particularly deep or difficult reading, but historically it's fascinating as an early work of Gothic fiction and a classic of the genre. Clearly influential and original in its execution, however messy. Which it is. It's a mess. The story is disjointed, sort of like a mixture anticipating the Gothic novels like Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu's proto-lesbian vampire story Carmilla, my personal favorite, and of course Dracula by Bram Stoker, all of which were written in the 19th century after the Sandman. Frankenstein came first, and Shelley, I believe, was inspired by Hoffman. Le Fanu and Stoker, I'm not certain. I haven't read the whole thing, but Dracula is composed of the letters, like the beginning of the Sandman is. And adding to the disjointed nature of the Sandman, it's told in the form of 3 letters at the beginning, and then a narrator, whom we only know as a friend of Nathaniel, takes over to relate the remainder of the tale. We never find out his name. It's frenetic, visceral, and doesn't make any sense. Unlike the slow, macabre buildup of Poe or Lovecraft's subtle, creeping dread, Hoffman starts off with a weird tone and doesn't let up off the gas until the car's dead. Poetry. This is what kept the story from being truly frightening for me. Because it's all so spectacular that it kind of remained outside of me on a stage, right? As an oddity. And I could never become immersed in the horror of the character. The story is just so outlandish. So as far as being truly frightening, no, not really, but eerie, dark, and definitely entertaining. Not quite like anything else I've ever read. It's kind of like the paintings of Fuseli, right? Whereas it's sort of like out of focus, kind of like misty. So like some of this almost this kind of like dream fog over everything. It's kind of like that. None of it feels real. It's kind of out of reality, right? It's in some sort of nightmare. When Nathaniel has a breakdown after discovering that Olympia is not what she seems, he shouts this line, "Spin, puppet, spin." And this reminded me of a book called The Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti, which is a philosophical work about the horrors of human consciousness. And Ligotti uses the word puppet frequently in that book. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ligotti was inspired by the work of E.T.A. Hoffman and specifically the Sandman. So, if you're a fan of Ligotti, you gotta check out this story. It also reminded me of The Invention of Morel by the Argentinian compatriot of Jorge Luis Borges, Adolfo Bioy Casares, one of my favorite novellas, which is about a fugitive who lands on an island in the middle of the ocean and falls in love with a woman in a film, a sort of lifelike 3D film played on the island for eternity, run by a machine controlled by the tides. It's a beautiful, mysterious, existential, poetic novella. It's a masterpiece. In The Sandman, we can spot a narrative theme that has become increasingly popular because of current events we're facing today in reality. Man falling in love with a machine, artificial intelligence. You can trace the origins of films like Blade Runner, Her, and Ex Machina back to The Sandman. You look at that, it only took about 200 years for something fantastical to become a real-world issue. It's disturbing, right? It's kind of a trip. Also, it's gothic romantic horror, so it has that kind of floofy, effete, and stuffy affected formality. Oh, Clara, how dreadful! Right? But if you can get into the strangeness, into the nightmarish quality of the story, it's a memorable read, and certainly worth your time if you're interested in studying the origins of gothic horror science fiction. It's not my favorite gothic horror story, but it's certainly unique. Not quite like anything else I've ever read. Charmingly demented, a fine way to inaugurate the forthcoming season of The Witch here in 2024. Better than food. so you should read it. Anyone who enjoys Sheridan Le Fanu, Poe, Lovecraft, Goethe, and Kafka, definitely check it out. More dark things to come as we move into fall. Enjoy. Coffee time. For those of you who are new, thank you very much for stopping by and watching the show. I take the names of all the patrons who are financially supporting the show on Patreon and I place them in this mason jar. And for every review, I pull out a name, and whoever's name I pull out, I send a hard copy of the book I'm reviewing, plus a bag of coffee, roasted by yours truly. Currently the coffee is from Brazil, and it is delicious. If you would like to get in on that and help support the show, you can click on the link below or go to patreon.com/books are better than food, and the tiers start at $5. Please set a monthly limit if you're on a budget, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Additionally, as a paid patron, you'll get access to all this cool stuff. And international shipping is included. All right, thank you very much to all my patrons, and best of luck. Okay, here we go. Austin R. Thank you very much, Austin. Really appreciate it. You're going to receive The Sandman in the collection of the Tales of Hoffman by E.T.A. Hoffman, plus a bag of delicious coffee, roasted by yours truly, and I hope you love both. Cheers. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I know there's a lot of you out there watching who are not subscribed, and I'd really appreciate it if you would, so small favor to ask. Thank you very much. Also, please hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed this, and also the notifications bell so you get notified every time I release a video. All right. And, of course, always remember, die reading. Okay. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Have a good night. I'll talk to you soon. Ciao.